Okay, well, didn't mean to clear the hall, but I'm glad the people that are here are here. And just to begin, as you know, we're going to be talking about game user research and teaching this. So our title is Our Subversive Goal in Teaching Game User Research, but in actuality, the real title is Empathy, Why We Need It and How We Teach It. So I posit that game user research became something that we care about players. Most of you who are game user researchers care about players, right? So when people play a game, it's an immersive experience. You have that just incredible, amazing experience. Those of you here, think about maybe one of your most exciting player experiences. Why do you even like games? And why do we get into this field? We want players to have this experience, right? That's really what we care about. So I want to talk first about one of the first game experiences that I just loved. Has anyone played Tony Hawk here before? Yes, yes, so you probably get that, right? So when I first played Tony Hawk, I loved that visceral experience of like going up the ramp, doing all these really cool trips, and like things that I couldn't do in real life, I was actually able to do in this game. It gave me that experience that I loved, but I couldn't really do in real life. So it gave me that that feeling of accomplishment. It also allowed me to feel that that I could like lose all sense of time, you know, the word that goes around the flow model. But I really did experience that. And I'm sure I can bet all of you who love games have all had that experience. Am I right? Yeah? Okay, so Tony Hawk worked because the designers really were able to embed that sense of empathy into the assets of the game. Their creativity and their understanding of how I would enjoy that game, they were able to embody that. So, okay. So enough of Tony Hawk, and let's move to, first of all, I'm going to talk about Dennis and I. We're both teaching at USC, and I'll start with Dennis. There's Dennis, of those of you who know him. So Dennis is a full-time professor now at USC. He teaches game user research. He's an HCI pioneer. He's a psychologist. He's the former head of Microsoft Game Research. And he's now at USC, teaches game user research methods, and has been there for about 4 years. And me, I'm the founder and principal of User Behavioristics, a company that we do game user research. I've been working on this approximately since year 2000. I've worked on over 150 game titles, published over 30 publications. I have game chapters and books about games, et cetera, et cetera. And I've worked with a lot of companies like EA, THQ, LucasArts, Disney, et cetera. And now I'm currently working on a lot of mobile games for King, Social Point, and I also am doing some work in VR for Visionary. I'm also teaching at USC, and I've been doing this now 8 years, and I teach player experience insights. And the course is really about a practical, hands-on method, experiential learning. And we'll talk about why I believe that's really important. So back in the hallowed halls of Clark University, Dennis Wixon became a behavioral psychologist. And we'll see why this is important in a minute. Myself, I started as a clinical psychologist at UC Berkeley, where I really cared about people and understanding how they felt about things and observing. So decided to take the mad scientist route, and I became more of a social science researcher. That's kind of the thing that I loved, kind of the meta caring about people. And also, I love games, and I come from a long line of families of gamers. In fact, my cousin's great-grandmother just turned 107 last month. She lives in the Bay Area in Oakland, and she is a killer poker player. So anyways, it's pretty cool. So we as game user researchers and game designers, we want to create these really amazing experiences that we've all experienced. That's really what our goal is, right? So think about, when you think about your favorite player experience, like for me, it was The Last of Us. I love Skate. I love BioShock. I mean, actually, I just was reminded on the earlier talk about Assassin's Creed. Love those games. So, I really care. And I think a lot of you care about creating these experiences, right? So also, what we have to do is we not only care about players, we also want our game designers to care about players. Well, we assume they do, right? They probably do, but we really, really understand the player experience, not just what they think the player experience is, but actually what it really is. And we know that can be different. I imagine that a lot of you work with game designers, game design teams, who perhaps maybe, they care about the players. They certainly desire to embody what the players really want, but maybe they are rock star game designers and they think, they get it and it's the way it is. And maybe, game user research has been thought of as, oh, it takes so much time, it's going to interrupt the schedule, and oh, well, we already know what the players will do. And then also sometimes the designers may not have seen the whole game play all the way through, right? So maybe some of you have had this experience where, the game design team maybe is not prioritizing game user research. So I don't know if you've all had that. And some of the companies clearly, like Hearing Today, which is amazing, we're at a point where a lot of companies really get it. But I imagine some of you have experienced where maybe not all companies and all designers get it. So I know I certainly have had to work with those kinds of companies. So anyways, as I thought about game user research, and I really thought, I've been in this field for a long time, so I'm just, I'm really thinking, like, what's kind of the integrating, embodiment of what we do? And, I really believe that empathy really plays a central role. When you really think about it, when you think deeper and about kind of the meta sense, it's really about empathy. So I believe we both really want to understand, and we also want others to understand the users. So we want the users to be understood. So understand and understood are both concepts. So to think about this work in this context, I think we both have to create empathy, and then we also have to translate this, right? So I've heard this in many talks, in different ways. It's that we've seen today. It really is about how do we create that and how do we translate that. So we think about the word empathy. When you look at the description, one of the descriptions is imaginative projection of one's own consciousness on another person. Interesting way to think about it. The original translation of empathy back in German is feeling into, and then the English translation is feeling into another. So that being said, it really is about something that when you're creating a game, you're really embedding that empathy into that design. So we really, ideally, what we're finding as user researchers, we want the designers to embody that and embed that into the design. And guess what? It's really, really hard to do. So as game user researchers, we're really good at observing players. We're good at observing player experience. We're good at observing people. We're really good at that mind meld. If those of you understand this concept, we're doing the Spock mind meld. That's really what I like to think about it. So we have many methods. Obviously, we've talked today a lot about different methods. We observe players, we do play testing, we do analytics, we do metrics. Even over the first talk at Riot, they do education to make sure that everybody gets this concept about, how do players really feel and how are they really experiencing your game. So we're doing that translation. We have labs, we do a lot of different things. So we create an understanding about empathy with the players and the player experience. And then the next goal and the next challenge is translating this. So we do this through a lot of our GER tools. We do playtesting, we do video analysis, we show them how the players really feel. That seems to get to them. We also do things like creating personas and a lot of different ways that we help to translate that to the designers so they get it more on a meta level as well as on a minute-to-minute level. So we want them to understand. So now, getting to USC, so how then do we translate all this knowledge and this understanding so that students, future game user researchers, and future game designers and people on game design teams, how do we then translate this information so that students will get this? So considering that not all of industry gets the value of game user research, how do we ensure that we no longer have to justify game user research, and that how do we ensure that future students that are going to go out in industry are really just going to get this intuitively? Some do, but not all. How do we ensure that? What if we can affect the future of industry with our students? So how do Dennis and I get students to really experience this empathy and to not just to learn methods, not just learning communication skills, but how do we get them to really get this empathy? So we do this, and how do we make them feel that this is an intuitive experience to do playtesting and game user research? So to start with, a little bit about our students. We're at Interactive Media and Games. That's in Southern California, for those of you who are not aware. School of Cinematic Arts. Our students traditionally come from traditional school backgrounds, and they tend to be very high achievers, and they're used to doing traditional learning. So the main intent for teaching our courses is basically this. This is what we tell them. The kind of overt message is research methods that demonstrate and illuminate for students how to observe, analyze, design, and communicate optimal player experience. So those are for our game user research students. Now, mind you, most of our students come into the department as game design students, some from computer science, but mostly game design students. So people who end up taking our courses, and we have 3 to 4 courses now and growing. And when they come into our class, they're really, we're interested, and we're told this is kind of a good class to take. It's a fun class, we learn a lot. But people don't necessarily come in thinking, I'm going to be a game user researcher, and this is really important. So, so what we're actually teaching is we're actually teaching students empathy. So how do we do this? We put students into the shoes of the actual different people that we're looking at. Not only the players, but also the game designers, the game user researchers, they all switch places. So they get to walk in their shoes. So I think this describes it really well, that you'll find that we let our students take the role of the player, we let them take the role of the game designer, we let them take the role of the game user researcher, so they get to switch places, so they get to really feel into each other's shoes. They get to realize that players also are not them, and even sometimes they may be like them, their experience might be very different. So they get to see that by observing and experiencing. So just to break down the understanding of empathy, there are 3 ways to look at it. We look at a Venn diagram that I have here. No empathy means you have the subject and the object, so the game and the player. So there's no connection between the two. People are not experiencing that, don't have that, don't understand that. Empathy really is an intersection of the two. And finally, no too much empathy means that you're over-identifying and over-projecting. In the terms of psychology, you're projecting yourself into way too much into that, and you lose all objectivity. So it really is still keeping your objectivity and looking at the player, but still having an understanding and feeling for that. So again, how do we ensure that our students are empathizing with others? And a lot of times they're like, oh, well, let's get other students in and let's observe them. And, oh, they're just like me. Well, other players are not like them. And they get to actually experience that when they're observing them. They're not like you. And this guy is not like you. And these guys aren't like you. And then guess what? Even the game design team people tend to not be like you. So what do we do with that? As we get to looking at understanding empathy a little bit deeper, we go from, actually this is a model that a designer, and I have to read his name, Sung Chim Lum, a wonderful designer who did a talk at the UX conference and magazine on empathy. And he drew this graph in terms of understanding empathy. And you start at the top with not empathizing and going to a realization of empathy and finally empathizing. And he talks about all these different methods that we go to learn and find out about in creating empathy. So it's not a definitive science by any means. That's what's difficult about it. And I posit that we help create empathy by actually some of our tools that we use. All the tools that we use, we go out in the world and we try to understand and get empathy. And then we try to translate that to the designers through various methods. So empathy is insight into the player. We can almost say that empathy, we do empathy not just with the player, but with the game itself, and certainly with the game designers. We're thinking about what their intent is. We're really trying to understand what they really want the game to be, because they're the creative people about the game. We want to make sure to capture and incorporate their intent in their final design and some of our analyses and understandings so that we can offer them perhaps a better understanding of why the players are doing what they're doing. And certainly suggestions if we do that. So talking about the class itself, we really focus on experiential learning. And I'll talk about Dennis's class tends to do a lot of theory and concepts and experiential learning. And in my class that I teach is really experiential learning in terms of some of the main methods that we use. So we do some analytics, we do think aloud, we do some heuristics, we do hypothesis generation. And they really, it's demonstrated, it's practice, and then they get to do it. And this overall sense is they really get to experience it. We do it in a lot of different ways and a lot of different methods, but this is the main foundation of what we do. They get to observe players, and then they also learn about communicating with designers. So they actually learn about communication skills. They learn about diplomacy. They learn about how to, like, what kind of words to use, not to use, like never say never, never say should. I know this morning one of the talks was about using the term consider this idea. Those kinds of things are taught to our students, and they become extremely important when allowing the designer to stay open to whatever insights and concepts you're getting. So we have a lab, and we also have guest speakers so that they can also see some experiences in industry from the actual mouth of the babe, so to speak. And we have actually quite a few people here who have been guest speakers at the conference. So we're really grateful, and I know the students love to hear about real experiences. So yeah, we have the lab, and they actually they work with actually another class who are game designers who are creating a game. And our students, even though they're game design students, they become game user researchers in my class. And then they go and work with the game design class and do 2 iterations of playtesting. So they plan the study, they recruit, they observe the players, they communicate with the designers they are observing, and then they analyze the data and then they report it to the designers. So they actually have to meet with them face to face and sit down and go through everything that what they've identified, all the insights that they have. And then as a result, they actually, both the students and the student designers are learning about the player experience. And they're gaining this empathy. So the student designers watch the users, and also the game user researchers, the student designers all get to watch the users, and they all create an empathy for the users through this experience. So once they get the results, they're already in. You know, they already have seen the user, and they get it. So we think about that empathy is not really something that we can teach. It's a state. It's not something we can, just, this is what empathy, so now experience it. It's really, you have to embody empathy. So we really have to do this, and we found a lot of success in doing this by just having our students go through this experience, both with the game design students and as game user researchers. Having gone through this experience and taking turns in class and being in a safe place and taking different roles, they are able to actually experience this, and they actually end up embodying it. So we give them the tools, and it seems to work, which is pretty amazing. So here's an example of 2 students who were game design students. And our students from the game user research class did 2 iterations of user testing on their game. Now, these 2 game design students were kind of reticent about the results. They were like, oh, we kind of know what's up. But they actually became enlightened once they saw the results and went through this whole experience. So here's a little sample of what they said. And
wanted to pump out as many features as we could as quickly as possible, and then we weren't really realizing that people wouldn't understand some of the things that are going on. The main menu, I think as soon as we got it to work where you hit A and it moves on, like, oh, that works, it's great, moving on, let's do something else. And then afterwards we realized, yeah, people don't really get that. So then now there's just like a really simple thing that just says press A to continue. So we have a lot of stuff that we had to change just to sort of beat the user over the head and be like, this is how you do everything. And it's really simple now. And we changed a lot of stuff just based on what we saw. There was a lot of issues that we sort of ignored because, once again, because we're the ones that made it, we know a lot of how things work, so we didn't actually see it ourselves. And we didn't look at it from the perspective of a user that had no idea what's going on. So things like the story, because we knew that you have a rival.
Okay, so as you can see, they're gaining this experience, and they get it in real time, which is pretty amazing. So once the students go out in the world, we have the game user research students who, remember, a lot of them are game designers students, go out in the world, and they watch users, and some of them become game user researchers. Some of them go out in the world and become part of the design team. And then the other really unintended effect that's really been quite amazing is the student designers in the student design class, because they've watched the users, they go out into the world, become game designers, and they get it. They have empathy for the players. They get game user research. It's a really phenomenal thing that we've seen. And we're planting a lot of seeds. That was one of the main intents of actually even having this class is planting seeds for the future so that both game design teams, game executives would get game user research, as well as new game user researchers. And we found that actually, after now doing this program 8 years, that we have lots of students that are sprinkled throughout industry. It's really quite amazing. We've seen lots of sprouting of game user researchers. We have a couple of #1 games. We have studio heads, we have executives, producers, and we actually have several game user researchers that are out there working Activision and Visionary and Disney, Nexon, all kinds of places. So the thing that's amazing, it seems to work. So I just want to end by saying that our takeaway is that ultimately, if you emulate the experience in the classroom that you would have in the real world and have them actually experience that, then the goal of the subversive goal of creating empathy state is likely to occur. And that's it. Thank you so much. So we have about 1 minute for questions.
Does your undergraduate program lead into any sort of master's program or PhD programs after they graduate, or is it specifically related to getting out into the real world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of students do go out in the real world after the bachelor's, but we have an MFA program. We just installed a game user research minor. It's an undergraduate program, but we're looking at actually adding a master's to that. So yeah. Yeah, and I think we actually have, like 1 or 2 students that we are going to take through a PhD, although it's not an official program yet. Yeah, great. And anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. And if you're starting any programs or you're looking to teach game user research, I'm happy to go into more detail with anyone. So thank you so much, and you can reach Dennis and myself at these addresses. So thank you.